Unmute. Yep. Hi. Welcome to I guess this is the third week of the History Chats. I guess without further ado, I'm just going to give it right to Gary. But just if you're just joining us for the first time, welcome. This is a short, short form discussion, kind of a mid-afternoon talk where we'll spend about 10-15 minutes talking about a little bit of history from Marathon County. In this case, Gary's going to be talking about the church schools of Marathon County. So if during the course of this discussion, feel free if you have any questions, comments, put them in the chat, and we will do our best to address them in the period afterwards. We'll have a Q&A afterwards, or opportunity to have some light discussion. So that's the deal. With that, I will give it to Gary to start talking about the schools. There you go.
Thank you very much. Welcome this afternoon to the Historical Society's continuing programs on schools of Marathon County. Two earlier programs dealt with the early schools of Wausau and rural schoolhouses of Marathon County. Today we are going to briefly talk about the history of church schools in Marathon County. It is indeed a rich history. The history of Marathon County settlers reveal a strong attachment and devotion to their church. The large German and Polish populations and the smaller Irish settlers were committed to a Christian education for their children. Today we'll talk about some of these church schools in Wausau and rural Marathon County. This will only be a small sample of the extent of these schools. There is a long list of these schools, and in our time today, we'll simply talk about a brief sample. So we begin with the early ones.
Might need to
We begin, I just like this is a picture of the white pine. This is why we came here to begin with. This brought the settlers in. We'll begin with St. Mary's Parochial School on Grand Avenue in Wausau. Catholics started to begin celebrating Mass in 1849, just a few years after George Stevens came here to Wausau. Wooden buildings were perhaps the first spots where the classes were being held. Confirmation class was usually the first things that the congregations settled in on. But this one was built in 1883, 4 classrooms with living quarters for the nuns up on the second floor. 125 students at that time. So indeed, it was a fairly large population that that St. Mary's was starting to draw upon. Sisters of the Divine Savior were the first ones here. The Sisters of Notre Dame out of Milwaukee were the first order here. Later came these Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration. So this building, 1883, St. Mary's later on would build this larger schoolhouse with gymnasiums and a much larger facility next to their church on Grand Avenue. At the same time, in the same neighborhood, pretty much on Seymour Street in Wausau, Zion Lutheran congregation was started 1874. Again, a variety of different classrooms were always being used for the teaching of the young people. In 1879, they had their first school classes were being held pretty much in their old church at that time on Seymour Street. But in 1892, the congregation built this school also on Seymour Street, just off of Grand Avenue, very close to St. Mary's Church, in fact, right around the corner. This followed with this school on 5th and McClellan in 1919. Again, should we say that these were pretty much grades 1 through 8? There were 4 classrooms in this building, two grades to a classroom, of course, and then a basement for hot lunch and whatever. Again, being built again in 1892. I'm sorry, in 1919 at 5th and McClellan. In 1962, their present facility at 616 Grant Street was dedicated. However, this facility was, the school was closed from the congregation in May of 2001. At that time, they had 36 students compared to earlier years of 200 to 300. So the congregation felt really at that time that they really would be benefiting with their finances if the school was closed and that this facility, the schoolhouse, was closed. I bring us to the west side of Wausau on Stewart Avenue with Trinity Lutheran Church. Trinity Lutheran was a daughter of Zion on the west side. Zion had originally given several blocks to Trinity Lutheran Church for their new building, for their new sanctuary. In 1908, their church was formed. This building was dedicated in 1926. A variety of classes prior to that were always in neighboring buildings, but in 1926, this schoolhouse was built. You can see that Trinity made a very large addition to their schoolhouse much later on, adjoining their sanctuary on Stewart Avenue. I moved then to St. Michael's Catholic School and Church in Wausau. St. Michael's being a Polish congregation formed basically from the Mother Church of St. Mary's. The Polish congregation felt that they really indeed wanted a Polish church where they could speak Polish. So they built this church in 1913. The church itself was formed in 1888. So this is one of the earlier churches in the city of Wausau. Again, a testament to the early Polish population coming into Wausau, as well as throughout Marathon County. This schoolhouse was raised in 2002. We'll talk a little bit about the rearrangement of the Catholic school system a little bit later on. Into the rural parts of Marathon County, I want to just travel down Highway Z to the east of Wausau, St. John's in the town of Easton. The congregation, again, 1884. Again, early frame schools, 1888. This one, 1925, this red brick schoolhouse. The schoolhouse was enlarged again in 1961. It is noted that this is one of the rare parochial schools to transport its students back and forth to school. Traveling a little bit to the west of Wausau in Marathon City, we want to call attention to St. Joseph. St. Joseph, in the early days, St. Joseph School was attached to St. Mary's Catholic Church in Marathon. Eventually, they would change that name to St. Mary's School, but in the early days, it was called St. Joseph's. St. Mary's congregation itself, coming to that little settlement in the late 1850s, First school classes were held in the church basement. A smaller 1904 brick school was built. It wasn't really, this schoolhouse was built in 1904. An extensive classroom itself, a chapel and two bowling alleys. This burned to the ground in 1936. But again, a testament to the congregation, a fairly large school. And then eventually, like I say, the name was changed to St. Mary's. It is now they've completely rebuilt their schoolhouse. That one was raised, the old schoolhouse was raised, and now they have this modern facility sitting next to their sanctuary on the hill in downtown Marathon. A little bit further into the rural areas of Marathon County was Holy Family School, attached to Holy Family Catholic Church in Pawtucket. Again, a very small community, and a testament to the settlers there in Pawtucket and the neighboring towns, really. But again, a Polish congregation. In 1910, they felt a need to teach their young, and so they had this schoolhouse built as part of Holy Family Catholic Church in 1910. It closed in 1970. Again, another smaller, just like Pawtucket, another smaller community was off of Highway 153 on the southwestern part of Marathon County, is St. Robert's Catholic School, attached to St. Patrick's Catholic Church in Halder. It took a little longer for this schoolhouse to be built, 1921, but it was dedicated with 80 students. And one of the rare things with, I'm not sure how common it was, but they had grades 1 through 10. So they felt really a strong feeling that they had to really go into the lower levels of the high school and teach their young students in grades 1 through 10. Coming back into Wausau, I want to call your attention to St. James School, 1931, on the corner of 2nd Street and McClellan, attached to, again, St. James Catholic Church, which was across the street. St. James Catholic Church started in the late 1890s. Basically, they're on 2nd Street. This schoolhouse was built in 1931 with five classrooms. This schoolhouse was just recently torn down to make way for city development downtown. But again, what was happening in the late 1960s and into the early 1970s was a complete shift, really, in our culture. And this was an article in 1970, which the diocese was starting to take a look at some of these smaller schools throughout the county. And the article says the diocesan board took action to close several smaller schools in June, including Sacred Heart School in Kessel, which we did not talk about this morning, St. Robert's School in Halder, which we just mentioned as part of St. Patrick's Catholic Church, St. Michael's School in Hewitt, and then Holy Family School, again, that we had mentioned in Pawtucket. So again, a whole change, and this led to a real formation of the Catholic schools within the city, within the metro area, and really a merging of schools to save the facilities as well as to save the funds that are needed to teach the young people, the children of the parishes. And I show this as sort of a lead into next week's one when we start to talk about schools of the 20th century. This is Newman High School, built into the middle part of the last century. But again, one of the developments within the Catholic Church in Wausau and in the diocese, the starting of Newman Catholic School. So we'll talk about this next week. Again, also was mentioning the fact that we are looking for suggestions for more of these history chats. Next week, we talk about the schools of the 20th century, more of the modern, some of the things that are developing mostly since World War II. But if we have suggestions with regard to ideas or chats that you want to have us develop here, we're eagerly looking forward to those. We think that we can present these for you. And if there's some things of interest that you really want to know more about, chat about, we'll be here to help you. So with that, I end the program, and we look forward to your comments, your suggestions as we go forth. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I'll take a moment. Again, as Gary said, feel free to add questions or comments or suggestions. We're eager to hear, what people would be interested in hearing about. While you're doing that, let me just share a couple events that are coming up with you, if I can do this correctly here real quick. Great. So I know that there was, let's see here, we've got a couple questions. Well, let's see, Christine Martins asked, was the school year similar to what it is today, or did it run differently to accommodate farming, et cetera? Is that a good question? Gary, is that, do we know much about the actual school year is that different from in these religious schools compared to the maybe non-religious schools?
I think that they were pretty much quite similar. I think the one obvious thing would be the religious education that was going on, confirmation or whatever. That was always a big part of their school day. And sometimes a church service is also a mass perhaps during the day. But I think the school year itself was pretty much and I think the curriculum, I think the church schools tried to match the curriculum as much as possible, as well as the school year, especially later on when school buses came into, they really had to start being more purposeful in matching the public schools calendar. But so that was, but I'm sure there was a great variety, but the religious education was a big part, of course, and those classes were always a big part of their daily education.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's see. I guess there's a question about, was there any famous graduates from the Wausau schools? I don't know if that's a separate question or if that's specific to the religious schools. Have any thoughts on that?
I'm sure there were. Right now that does not come to mind. I'm sure that there were.
All right. Well, it looks like that's the extent of sort of the kind of the questions at the moment. But again, as Gary said, feel free to add if you're viewing this after the fact. We would again love to have any thoughts or other questions about schools or other things that we can talk about in the future. But for that, I think we'll maybe call this a day now. Yeah, we'll see you again next Thursday at 12:30 for another History Chats. Thanks for watching.
Bye-bye.